The morning sun rose over the rugged peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, casting long shadows across the valley floor where Rebecca Walsh had been wandering for 3 days without food, without water, and without any sense of which direction might lead her back to civilization. She had left the wagon train against her father's explicit warnings, chasing after what she thought was a shortcut through the rocky terrain, and now she was paying the price for her stubborn independence as her legs trembled beneath her torn skirts and her lips cracked from dehydration. The year was 1872, and the westward expansion had brought thousands of hopeful families across the continental divide, searching for gold, land, or simply a fresh start in a country still healing from the wounds of civil war. Rebecca's family had been among them, leaving behind their modest farm in Ohio for the promise of California's fertile valleys. She was 19 years old, with copper-red hair that hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and green eyes that had always sparkled with curiosity and defiance in equal measure. Those same eyes now scanned the horizon desperately, searching for any sign of the trail she had lost, any landmark that might guide her back to safety. The valley stretched endlessly before her, a maze of sandstone formations and scrub brush that all looked identical under the harsh afternoon sun. Her canteen had run dry the previous morning, and the small bag of dried meat she had carried was long gone. Rebecca stumbled over loose rocks, catching herself against a boulder as dizziness washed over her. She knew she could not last much longer without water. The rational part of her mind understood that she needed to find shade to conserve her strength, but panic drove her forward with irrational hope that the next ridge might reveal the wagon trail. Meanwhile, 30 miles to the east, Ethan Xavier sat astride his chestnut mare, studying the ground with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his entire life reading the stories written in dust and stone. He was 24 years old, tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from years of hard work rather than natural bulk. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges of his hat, and his blue eyes held a quiet intensity that made most men think twice before crossing him. Ethan had been tracking cattle rustlers for the past week, hired by a rancher whose herd had been steadily diminishing. But this morning, he had found something else entirely. Boot prints, small and delicate, heading directly into the most treacherous section of the valley. No experienced traveler would have taken this route, which meant whoever had made these tracks was either foolish or desperate. Ethan dismounted and crouched low, examining the impressions more closely. The stride was uneven, suggesting exhaustion or injury, and the depth of the prints had grown shallower with each step, indicating the person was weakening. He had seen enough death in his years as a tracker to know that whoever had made these prints would not survive another day in this heat without help. His conscience would not allow him to simply ride away. The rustlers could wait. A human life hung in the balance, and Ethan Xavier had been raised by a mother who insisted that a man's character was measured by what he did when no one was watching. He swung back into the saddle and urged his mare forward, following the erratic path deeper into the valley. The sun climbed higher as Ethan tracked the footprints across rocky terrain that would have challenged even a seasoned outdoorsman. Whoever this person was, they had made every wrong choice possible, consistently heading away from water sources and natural shelter. He found a torn piece of blue fabric caught on a thorn bush and examined it carefully. Good quality cloth, probably from a dress or skirt. A woman then, alone in this unforgiving landscape. His jaw tightened with determination as he pushed his horse faster. Rebecca had collapsed in the meager shade of an overhanging rock formation when Ethan finally spotted her. For a terrible moment, he thought he had arrived too late. Her face was flushed with heat stroke, her breathing shallow, and she lay completely still against the red earth. He dismounted in one fluid motion and rushed to her side, pressing his fingers against her throat to check for a pulse. Relief flooded through him when he felt the weak but steady beat beneath her sun-scorched skin. "Easy now," he murmured, though she showed no sign of consciousness. Ethan uncapped his canteen and carefully dribbled water across her cracked lips, not giving her too much at once for fear she would choke. He wet his bandana and placed it across her forehead, then gently lifted her into a sitting position against his chest. "Come on, wake up. You are not dying out here today." Rebecca's eyelids fluttered as the moisture touched her tongue. Her throat worked convulsively, trying to swallow, and Ethan gave her another small sip. Gradually, her eyes opened, unfocused and confused. The first thing she saw was a stranger's face, tanned and strong-featured, looking down at her with an expression of intense concentration. For a disoriented moment, she thought she must be dreaming, or perhaps already dead. "That is it," Ethan encouraged softly as her green eyes finally focused on his face. "Drink slowly. You have been out here too long without water." "Who?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, her throat too dry and damaged for proper speech. "Ethan Xavier, I am a tracker, found your trail this morning." He supported her weight easily, continuing to offer small sips of water at intervals. "Can you tell me your name?" "Rebecca." She managed the single word before another wave of dizziness forced her to close her eyes again. The world seemed to spin even though she was sitting still, and only the solid presence of the stranger behind her felt real and steady. "Rebecca," Ethan repeated, committing it to memory. "Well, Rebecca, you picked about the worst possible route through this valley. Where were you trying to get to?" She struggled to form coherent thoughts through the fog of heat exhaustion. "Wagon train, lost the trail, thought I could find a shortcut." Even to her own ears, the words sounded foolish. 3 days of suffering had taught her exactly how foolish. "How long have you been out here?" 3 days, maybe 4. I stopped counting." Ethan cursed softly under his breath. 3 days in this heat without adequate supplies would have killed most people. The fact that she had survived this long spoke to a core of toughness beneath her delicate appearance. "Your wagon train will be long gone by now. They travel about 15 miles a day, and they cannot stop for everyone who wanders off." The harsh reality of his words cut through Rebecca's confusion. Her family would think her dead. They might have held a funeral service and everything. Tears welled in her eyes, though her dehydrated body could not actually produce them. "My father, my sisters, they will think I am gone." "We will worry about finding them later," Ethan said practically, though his voice gentled at her distress. "Right now, we need to focus on keeping you alive. Can you ride?" Rebecca tried to assess her own condition honestly. Her legs felt like they were made of water, and her head pounded with each slight movement. "I do not know." "Then I will ride, and you will hold on." Ethan made the decision quickly, already calculating how far they would need to travel to reach the nearest town. He had a camp set up about 8 miles back with proper supplies and a source of fresh water. If he could get her there by nightfall, she would have a fighting chance at full recovery. He stood, still supporting her weight, and was struck by how light she felt in his arms. Too light. She had been out here longer than she probably realized, and the exposure had taken a severe toll. Ethan carried her to where his mare waited patiently, and managed to lift Rebecca into the saddle, despite her weakened protests that she could manage on her own. Her independence, even in the face of near death, brought a slight smile to his lips as he swung up behind her. "Lean back against me," he instructed, gathering the reins with one hand, while keeping his other arm securely around her waist. "I will not let you fall." Rebecca had no choice but to comply, as her body simply refused to hold itself upright any longer. She sagged against the solid warmth of Ethan's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and the strong beat of his heart through his shirt. Under any other circumstances, such intimate contact with a strange man would have been scandalous, but propriety seemed absurdly insignificant when measured against survival. The journey back to Ethan's camp passed in a blur for Rebecca. She drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the rocking motion of the horse and the occasional murmur of Ethan's voice near her ear, speaking words of encouragement she could not quite comprehend. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the man behind her created a pocket of shade with his broad shoulders, shielding her as much as possible from further exposure. When they finally reached the camp, tucked into a sheltered canyon with a small spring trickling between ancient rocks, the sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon. Ethan dismounted carefully and lifted Rebecca down, carrying her to his bedroll, where he laid her out with surprising gentleness. He immediately set about building up the fire and putting a pot of water on to boil, moving with the efficient economy of someone long accustomed to taking care of himself in the wilderness. Rebecca watched through half-closed eyes as her rescuer worked. Now that her immediate terror had subsided, replaced by the numb exhaustion of someone pushed far beyond their limits, she found herself studying him with detached curiosity. He moved with quiet confidence, never wasting emotion, his hands steady and capable whether he was tending the fire or checking his supplies. There was something almost meditative about the way he approached each task, as though he had done these things so many times that they required no conscious thought. "Here," Ethan returned with a tin cup of lukewarm water from the spring. Drink this slowly, all of it. Then I will make you some broth." The water tasted like the finest wine Rebecca had ever sampled, cool and clean, sliding down her abused throat. She forced herself to sip rather than gulp, following his instructions even though her body screamed for her to drain the cup in one long swallow. When she finally finished, Ethan took the empty cup and refilled it without comment. "Why did you come looking for me?" Rebecca asked when she had drunk enough to make speech possible again. "You could have just followed your cattle rustlers." Ethan glanced at her from where he crouched by the fire, stirring dried meat and wild onions into the pot of boiling water. "Could have," he agreed, "but I was raised to believe that some things matter more than money. Rustlers will still be there tomorrow. You would not have been." The simple honesty of his answer left Rebecca momentarily speechless. In her limited experience, most men performed acts of heroism with an eye toward reward or recognition. Ethan Xavier seemed motivated by nothing more than basic human decency, which she found both refreshing and unsettling in equal measure. "I am grateful," she said finally. "I know those words are inadequate, but I do not know what else to say. You saved my life. You can thank me by eating this broth and getting your strength back." Ethan ladled the simple soup into a bowl and brought it to her, helping her sit up enough to manage the spoon. "What made you leave your wagon train in the first place?" Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with sun exposure. "Foolishness, arrogance, take your pick." She sipped the broth, savoring the salty richness even though it was barely more than flavored water. "I thought I saw an easier path through the mountains. My father said to stay with the group, but I was so certain I was right. I convinced myself that I would prove everyone wrong, show them all that I was capable of independent thought." "How did that work out for you?" The question could have been mocking, but Ethan's tone held only gentle curiosity. "Obviously not well." Rebecca managed a weak smile despite everything. "I suppose I have learned that confidence without competence is just another word for stupidity. You are too hard on yourself. Plenty of experienced scouts have gotten turned around in these valleys. The rock formations all look the same, and the heat does strange things to your sense of direction." Ethan settled back against his saddle, his own cup of coffee steaming in his hands. The mistake was not in getting lost. It was in not knowing when to stop moving and wait for help to find you. "Would help have found me? My wagon train is long gone, as you pointed out." "Maybe not your wagon train, but someone would have come eventually. We are not as alone out here as it sometimes seems." He took a long drink of his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "What was your family heading to California for?" "Land, a fresh start. The usual dreams." Rebecca took another spoonful of broth, feeling strength slowly seeping back into her limbs. "My father heard about fertile valleys where a man could stake a claim and build something lasting. After my mother died 2 years ago, he became obsessed with the idea of moving west, leaving behind all the memories that haunted him in Ohio." "And what did you want?" The question surprised her with its directness. Most people assumed that daughters simply followed wherever their fathers led, that women had no separate dreams or ambitions of their own. "I suppose I wanted what my father wanted, or at least I convinced myself I did. Adventure, opportunity, a chance to be somewhere new, where nobody knew our family history." She paused, considering. "But truthfully, I think I was running away as much as running towards something." "Running from what?" "Expectations? The assumption that I would marry some local farmer and spend the rest of my life in the same small town where I was born, surrounded by people who had known me since childhood and who had very fixed ideas about who I should be." Rebecca surprised herself with her honesty. Perhaps near-death experiences loosened the tongue, or perhaps there was something about Ethan Xavier that invited confession. "And now I am lost in more ways than one." She finished the broth and set the bowl aside, exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. "My family thinks I am dead. I have no idea where they are or how to find them. I barely survived 3 days on my own and would have died if you had not happened along. So much for independence." Ethan rose and came to kneel beside her bedroll, his expression serious in the firelight. "Listen to me, Rebecca Walsh. You made mistakes, yes, but you also survived 3 days in conditions that would have killed half the men I know. You kept moving when it would have been easier to lie down and quit. That takes strength, even if it was misdirected strength." He pulled a blanket up over her shoulders. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. Where will you sleep? Rebecca realized suddenly that there was only one bedroll in the camp. I have my saddle and another blanket. I have slept on worse. He moved back to the fire, dismissing her concern with a slight wave of his hand. Sleep, Rebecca. You are safe here. Despite her exhaustion, Rebecca found herself lying awake as true darkness fell across the canyon. The stars emerged overhead in breathtaking profusion, more than she had ever seen in her life, undimmed by any nearby lights. She could hear Ethan moving quietly around the camp, checking on the horse, banking the fire for the night, going through the evening rituals of a man accustomed to solitude. Ethan? She spoke his name softly into the darkness. Yes? Why do you live this way? Alone in the wilderness, tracking criminals and lost souls? There was a long pause before he answered. I suppose I am running too, in my own way. From a past that did not fit anymore, from expectations I could not meet. His voice came from somewhere near the fire, thoughtful and measured. Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not who his family is or what mistakes he made 5 years ago. It suits me. Rebecca wanted to ask more, to understand what shadows drove this capable, solitary man into the wilderness, but sleep claimed her before she could form the questions. Her last conscious thought was that she felt safer here, lying on the hard ground in a canyon miles from anywhere, than she had felt in months. Morning brought renewed strength and a clearer head. Rebecca woke to find Ethan already up, tending a small fire and preparing what looked like cornmeal mush in a blackened pot. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and inviting. She sat up slowly, testing her body's response, and was relieved to find that while she ached in approximately 1,000 places, the terrible weakness of the previous day had lifted. There is water in the basin if you want to wash up, Ethan said without turning around. We have a long day ahead of us. Rebecca found the basin, little more than a shallow depression in the rock that Ethan had filled from the spring, and gratefully scrubbed away 3 days' worth of grime and sweat. Her dress was beyond salvation, torn and stained almost beyond recognition, but at least her face and hands were clean. When she returned to the fire, Ethan handed her a plate of the cornmeal mush along with some dried fruit he had reconstituted in water overnight. What happens now? Rebecca asked between bites. The food was plain but filling, and she ate with an appetite sharpened by days of deprivation. Now we head to the nearest town, which is a place called Silver Creek about 2 days' ride from here. We can get you proper supplies, and I can make some inquiries about wagon trains that pass through heading west. Ethan poured her a cup of coffee, the tin container battered but clean. Your family would have had to stop for provisions somewhere along the route. Someone will remember them. 2 days? Rebecca felt her heart sink at the prospect of spending so long on horseback in her current condition. We will take it slow. There is no rush now that you are stable. Ethan met her eyes across the fire, and Rebecca found herself caught by the genuine concern she saw there. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had completely rearranged his life to help her without complaint or expectation of reward. The realization moved her more than she could express. They broke camp methodically, Ethan teaching Rebecca how to properly secure supplies to a horse and cover their traces so that predators or hostile parties would be less likely to follow. She learned that he had spent time with various native tribes, learning their tracking methods and survival skills, and that his knowledge of this harsh land was earned through years of patient study, rather than any natural gift. The ride towards Silver Creek took them through some of the most stunning landscape Rebecca had ever witnessed. Towering red rock formations carved by wind and water into fantastic shapes, valleys carpeted with wildflowers despite the harsh conditions, and wide vistas that seemed to stretch into infinity beneath an impossibly blue sky. Ethan proved to be an excellent traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land's history without overwhelming her with constant chatter. They stopped frequently to rest and water the horse, and during these breaks, Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn to her taciturn rescuer. Ethan Xavier was unlike any man she had known in Ohio. There was a self-sufficiency about him, a quiet confidence that came from truly knowing his own capabilities, rather than empty boasting. He listened when she spoke, considered her words carefully before responding, and treated her observations with the same seriousness he would have given a man's. On the second afternoon, as they crossed a wide meadow dotted with sagebrush, Rebecca finally worked up the courage to ask about his past. "You mentioned yesterday that you were running from something. Can I ask what?" Ethan was silent for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then he sighed, the sound carrying a weight of old sadness. "My father was a farmer in Missouri. Good, hard-working man who wanted nothing more than for me to take over the family land. My mother died when I was 16, and after that, it was just him and me working those fields day after day. What happened? I tried to be what he wanted, really tried for years, but farming did not fit me the way it fit him. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a life that belonged to someone else." Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "When I was 20, I told him I was leaving, heading west to make my own way. He said if I walked out that door, I should not bother coming back." "Oh, Ethan." Rebecca's heart ached for the pain she heard beneath his matter-of-fact words. "I left anyway. Figured he would come around eventually, that we would mend things when we both had time to cool down. I sent letters, but he never responded." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Last year, I got word from a neighbor that he had passed away. Heart gave out during harvest season. He died thinking I had abandoned him, and I never got the chance to explain that leaving was not about rejecting him. It was about finding out who I was meant to be. That must be incredibly hard to carry. Some days more than others." He glanced at her, his blue eyes reflecting old grief. "I learned that freedom always costs something. The question is whether the price is worth paying." They rode in contemplative silence for a while, Rebecca mulling over his words. She had never considered that seeking independence might require such painful sacrifices. Her own impulsive departure from the wagon train suddenly seemed childishly naive compared to the deliberate choice Ethan had made, knowing full well the consequences. Silver Creek, when they finally reached it late on the second day, proved to be a bustling frontier town perched at the edge of the foothills. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and various other establishments that served the miners, ranchers, and travelers who passed through this corner of California. Rebecca felt suddenly self-conscious about her bedraggled appearance as they rode down the dusty street, aware of the curious stares directed their way. Ethan led them directly to the boarding house, a two-story structure with a sign proclaiming "clean rooms and hot meals" in cheerful yellow letters. He helped Rebecca dismount, his hands steadying her when she wobbled slightly after so many hours in the saddle. "Wait here," he instructed, then disappeared inside the building. He emerged a few minutes later with a matronly woman who looked Rebecca over with shrewd but kind eyes. "Poor dear, you look absolutely done in," the woman declared. She was perhaps 50 years old, with silver-streaked brown hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun, and the capable air of someone who had seen everything twice. "I am Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Xavier here says you have been through quite an ordeal. Come along, let us get you into a proper bath and some clean clothes." Rebecca found herself whisked away before she could even thank Ethan properly. Mrs. Henderson kept up a steady stream of chatter as she led Rebecca upstairs to a surprisingly comfortable room with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "Now you just wait right here, dear. I will have my girls bring up the bathing tub and plenty of hot water. Are you hungry? Of course you are hungry. Silly question. I will have some dinner sent up as well." Mrs. Henderson paused at the door, her expression gentling. "Mr. Xavier paid for 3 nights in advance and left funds for whatever supplies you might need. That is a good man you have there. Honorable. They are rare as hen's teeth these days." "He is not mine," Rebecca protested weakly. "He simply found me lost in the valley and brought me here." Mrs. Henderson's knowing look suggested she had heard similar denials before. "Whatever you say, dear, I will go see about that bath." True to her word, Mrs. Henderson returned within the hour, accompanied by 2 young women carrying buckets of steaming water, which they poured into a copper tub dragged into the center of the room. Rebecca nearly wept with gratitude as she sank into the hot water, washing away days of accumulated misery. Mrs. Henderson provided soap that smelled of lavender and a clean dress that, while somewhat old-fashioned and too large, was infinitely better than her ruined traveling clothes. Clean, fed, and dressed in borrowed garments, Rebecca finally felt human again. She stood at the window, watching the street below as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Somewhere down there, Ethan Xavier was presumably seeing to his horse and his own needs, probably sleeping in the stable rather than paying for a room of his own. The thought bothered her more than it should have. The next morning, Rebecca woke to bright sunshine streaming through her window and the unfamiliar sensation of having slept in a real bed. For a confused moment, she forgot where she was, her mind still caught in nightmares of endless desert valleys and dying of thirst. Then, memory returned, bringing with it a complicated mix of relief, gratitude, and uncertainty about what came next. She dressed in the borrowed dress and made her way downstairs to the boarding house's dining room, where Mrs. Henderson presided over breakfast with the same capable efficiency she brought to everything else. The older woman spotted Rebecca immediately and waved her over to a table where Ethan already sat, working his way through a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Good morning," Rebecca said, suddenly shy as she took the seat across from him. In the bright light of day, with both of them clean and rested, their situation felt different somehow, more real and immediate than it had during the crisis. "Morning," Ethan gestured to the food. "Eat. You need to rebuild your strength." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Ethan spoke again. "I made some inquiries last night. There were 3 wagon trains that passed through here in the last 2 weeks, all heading for various parts of Central California. I got names of the wagon masters and descriptions of the families traveling with them." Rebecca's heart leaped. "Do you think one of them was mine?" "Maybe. One train included a man matching your father's description traveling with his daughters. The wagon master was a fellow named Jeremiah Collins, and they were heading for a settlement in the Sacramento Valley." Ethan pulled a folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it on the table. "I drew a map of the route they would likely take. If we leave today and ride hard, we might be able to catch up with them in a week." "A week?" Rebecca tried to imagine her father's face when she appeared alive, after he had given her up for dead. The joy, the relief, but also the anger at her recklessness that had caused such pain. "That is assuming they have not run into any delays, and that my information is accurate." Ethan refolded the map and tucked it away. "But I think it is our best chance." "Our?" Rebecca focused on the word. "You have already done so much. Surely you do not intend to escort me all the way to Sacramento Valley." "I am not sending you off alone, if that is what you are suggesting." Ethan's tone made clear this point was not up for debate. "You have no horse, no supplies, and no knowledge of the terrain. Besides, I have no pressing business elsewhere. The rustlers are long gone by now." Rebecca wanted to argue, to insist that she could not ask any more of him, but the practical part of her mind recognized the truth in his words. She was utterly dependent on his help, at least until she rejoined her family. "Then I suppose we had better prepare for the journey." They spent the day in Silver Creek gathering supplies, during which Rebecca got her first real look at Ethan Xavier in his element. He negotiated with the general store owner over prices with good-humored firmness, selected equipment with a practiced eye for quality and utility, and handled every transaction with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he needed. He purchased Rebecca a proper riding outfit, sturdy boots, a hat to protect her from the sun, and insisted she try on everything to ensure it fit correctly. "I cannot let you pay for all of this," Rebecca protested, as Ethan added yet another item to their growing pile of purchases. "I have no money to repay you." "Did I ask to be repaid?" Ethan raised an eyebrow at her. "Consider it an investment in making sure you do not die on the trail and make me look bad." Despite the levity of his words, Rebecca sensed the deeper truth beneath them. Ethan Xavier was the sort of man who, once he took responsibility for something, saw it through to the end, regardless of personal cost. She found this quality both admirable and slightly frustrating, as it left her feeling perpetually in his debt. They also stopped by the small building that served as Silver Creek's telegraph office, where Rebecca composed a message to be sent to Sacramento, hoping it might somehow reach her father and let him know she was alive. The telegraph operator, a nervous young man with ink-stained fingers, promised to send it immediately, though he warned that getting word to people on the move was always uncertain. That evening, Ethan arranged for Rebecca to have a proper saddle horse, a gentle bay mare named Daisy, who had the patient temperament necessary for a relatively inexperienced rider. He spent an hour teaching Rebecca the basics of saddling, bridling, and general horse care, patiently correcting her mistakes and explaining the reasoning behind each step. "A horse is not just transportation," Ethan explained, as he showed her how to check Daisy's hooves for stones. "She is a partner who will carry you through dangerous country. You take care of her, and she will take care of you." Rebecca found herself studying Ethan's hands as he worked, noting the careful gentleness with which he handled the animal despite his obvious strength. There was something deeply attractive about a man who combined competence with kindness, power with restraint. She caught herself staring more than once and had to forcibly redirect her attention to the lesson at hand. They departed Silver Creek at dawn the following morning, riding northeast toward the Sacramento Valley, with enough supplies to last them at least 2 weeks if they were careful. The country they traveled through was less harsh than the valley where Rebecca had nearly died, but it still demanded respect and constant vigilance. Ethan set a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses, and he taught Rebecca to read the land as they rode, pointing out water sources, edible plants, and signs of animal activity. On the third day out of Silver Creek, they encountered their first serious obstacle in the form of a river swollen with late spring snowmelt from the high mountains. The water ran fast and deep, churning brown with sediment, and Rebecca eyed it with considerable trepidation. "Can we go around?" she asked, hoping for a simpler solution. "Not without adding 3 days to our journey." Ethan studied the current thoughtfully. "It can be forded, but we need to pick our spot carefully and approach it right." He spent nearly an hour scouting up and down the riverbank, before finding a place where the water spread wider and presumably shallower across a gravel bar. Even there, Rebecca could see the current was formidable, easily capable of sweeping away an unwary rider. "Stay close behind me," Ethan instructed as he urged his mare into the water. "Let Daisy pick her own path, and whatever you do, keep her moving forward. If she stops, the current will knock her down." Rebecca's heart hammered as Daisy stepped into the river, the cold water rising quickly to the horse's belly and then to her chest. The current pushed hard against them, and Rebecca gripped the saddle horn with white-knuckled terror as she felt Daisy struggle to maintain her footing. Ahead of her, Ethan kept up a steady stream of encouragement, his own horse powering through the deepest part of the channel with determined strength. Then Daisy stumbled, her front hoof slipping on the rocky bottom, and for one heart-stopping moment, Rebecca felt herself tilting sideways toward the rushing water. She cried out involuntarily, and Ethan reacted with startling speed, turning his horse back toward her, even as Daisy scrambled for purchase. "Keep your weight centered," Ethan shouted over the roar of the river. "You are all right. She has it." Whether through luck or Daisy's own determination, the mare found solid footing and lunged forward, carrying Rebecca into shallower water, and finally up onto the far bank. Rebecca's legs shook so badly she could barely dismount, and when she finally slid from the saddle, Ethan was there to steady her. "You did well," he said, and the approval in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the exertion of the crossing. Many experienced riders would have panicked in that situation. "I did panic," Rebecca admitted with a shaky laugh. "I just did not fall off while I was doing it." They made camp early that evening to allow the horses to rest and their own nerves to settle. Ethan started a fire and prepared a simple meal while Rebecca tended to Daisy, brushing out the mare's coat and checking her legs for any injuries from the river crossing. The work was oddly soothing, requiring just enough concentration to quiet her racing thoughts. As twilight settled over their camp, Rebecca found herself watching Ethan across the fire, studying his profile in the dancing light. Over the past days, she had learned so much about this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. She knew that he preferred his coffee black and strong, that he had a habit of whistling softly while he worked, and that he possessed an unexpectedly dry sense of humor that emerged during quiet moments. She knew that he was patient almost to a fault, that he pushed himself harder than he pushed anyone else, and that he carried his burdens silently rather than seeking sympathy. What she had not expected was the growing realization that she was falling in love with him. The thought came to her with startling clarity as she watched him clean their dinner dishes in sand, his movements economical and practiced. This was not the romantic infatuation she had felt for boys back in Ohio, all fluttering hearts and stolen glances. This was something deeper and more unsettling, rooted in genuine respect and admiration for who Ethan Xavier actually was rather than who she imagined him to be. "You are staring," Ethan observed without looking up from his task. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. I was just thinking. About? She could not very well tell him the truth, so she settled for a partial honesty. About how strange life is. A week ago, I was dying in a valley with no hope. Now I am here, learning to ford rivers and take care of horses, traveling with someone who was a complete stranger. Everything changed so quickly. Ethan set aside the clean dishes and came to sit beside her on the log they were using as a bench. Not quite touching, but close enough that Rebecca could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "Change is not always bad," he said quietly. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the directions we did not plan." "Is that what happened with you? Coming west, I mean." "In some ways." He gazed into the fire, his expression distant. "I lost my father, which I will always regret. But I found myself out here in a way I never could have if I had stayed in Missouri and tried to live someone else's life. I learned what I am capable of, what matters to me. There is value in that, even if the cost was high." Rebecca gathered her courage and asked the question that had been forming in her mind all day. "What do you want, Ethan? Not from life in general, but specifically. If you could have anything, what would it be?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca thought he might deflect the question as he sometimes did when conversations grew too personal. Then he turned to look at her directly, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight, and said, "Honestly, I want to stop running. I want to find a place, or maybe a person, worth staying for. I have been moving for 4 years, always heading toward the next horizon, and I am starting to realize that freedom without purpose is just another kind of prison." The vulnerability in his admission took Rebecca's breath away. She understood instinctively that Ethan Xavier did not share such thoughts lightly, that he was offering her something precious in his honesty. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "I think you will find it," she said softly. "That place or person worth staying for. You just have to be willing to recognize it when it appears." Ethan's hand turned under hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. They sat that way for a long time, hand in hand in the firelight, not speaking but communicating something deeper than words could express. The moment was broken by Ethan's horse whinnying a warning. Ethan was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip as he scanned the darkness beyond their fire. Rebecca rose more slowly, her heart suddenly pounding, remembering all the stories she had heard about bandits and hostile parties that preyed on travelers. "Stay by the fire," Ethan commanded quietly, moving to the edge of the light with a predator's grace. "Do not move unless I tell you to run." Rebecca watched with bated breath as he disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and her rapidly multiplying fears. Minutes passed like hours until she heard voices, low and conversational, drifting back from the darkness. Then Ethan reappeared, followed by 3 men on horseback. The riders were rough-looking characters, weathered and hard-eyed in a way that suggested they lived outside the boundaries of respectable society. The man in the lead was perhaps 40 years old, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Evening, miss," the scarred man said, tipping his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "Name is Black. My companions and I saw your fire and thought we would be neighborly, see if you folks needed any help out here." "We are fine," Ethan said flatly, positioning himself between Rebecca and the newcomers. "We have everything we need." "That is mighty unfriendly, friend." Black's eyes slid past Ethan to assess Rebecca with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Pretty lady like that, traveling through dangerous country. Seems like you could use more protection than one man can provide." "I said we are fine." Ethan's voice dropped into a register that Rebecca had never heard from him before, cold and utterly devoid of compromise. "You should move along." The tension in the air was suddenly thick enough to cut. Rebecca watched the 3 men exchange glances, clearly weighing whether the potential rewards of pressing the issue outweighed the risks. Ethan stood utterly still, his hand resting casually near his revolver, but Rebecca could sense the coiled readiness in every line of his body. Finally, Black shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "No offense meant, friend. We will be on our way." He began to turn his horse, then paused. "Word of advice, though. You might want to consider your route more carefully. These hills are full of folks who might not take no for an answer as easily as we did." They rode off into the darkness, and Ethan did not relax until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Even then, he stood listening for several more minutes before returning to the fire. "We are breaking camp," he announced, already moving to gather their supplies. "Those three will likely double back once they think we are asleep. I want to be long gone before they return." Rebecca helped him pack with shaking hands, the pleasant mood of the evening thoroughly shattered. Within 20 minutes, they were mounted and moving through the darkness, guided by moonlight and Ethan's knowledge of the terrain. They rode for several hours before Ethan finally deemed it safe to stop and make a cold camp in a defensible position among large boulders. "I am sorry," Ethan said, as they huddled together in the darkness, keeping each other warm without the comfort of a fire. "I should have been more cautious about where we camped." "You could not have known," Rebecca replied, though she pressed closer to his side, grateful for his solid presence. "Do you think they were bandits?" "Almost certainly. Probably looking for easy targets to rob, or worse." His arm came around her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and comforting. "Try to sleep if you can. We will move again at first light." Sleep seemed impossible under the circumstances, but Rebecca must have dozed off eventually because she woke to find herself curled against Ethan's chest, with his coat draped over her shoulders and the first hints of dawn lightening the eastern sky. He was already awake, keeping watch, and Rebecca wondered if he had slept at all during the night. They resumed their journey as soon as there was enough light to travel safely, both of them subdued and watchful. The encounter with the three bandits had served as a stark reminder that the frontier was not a romantic adventure, but a genuinely dangerous place where violence could erupt without warning. Rebecca found herself newly grateful for Ethan's presence, understanding with absolute clarity that she would not have survived a week on her own, even if she had not gotten lost. 3 more days of hard riding brought them to the outskirts of a region that showed signs of recent settlement. Crude cabins dotted the landscape, and newly turned fields suggested farmers attempting to tame this wild country. Ethan made inquiries at the first homestead they encountered, a rough-hewn structure occupied by a German immigrant family who offered them water and directions in heavily accented English. Yes, they had seen a wagon train pass through about 4 days prior, heading north toward a community called New Helvetia. The train had stopped to trade for fresh vegetables and had mentioned plans to settle in the valley beyond the next range of hills. Rebecca's excitement grew with each piece of confirming information. Her family was close, perhaps only 2 or 3 days ahead now. Soon she would be reunited with her father and sisters, would leave behind this strange interlude of survival and intimate companionship with a man she barely knew but had come to care for deeply. The thought brought less joy than it should have, accompanied as it was by the realization that reunion with her family would mean parting from Ethan. He would return to his solitary wandering, and she would continue on to whatever future awaited her in California. Their paths had crossed by chance, and now they would diverge again, leaving her with nothing but memories of the man who had saved her life, and, perhaps, begun to show her what love could actually look like. They found the wagon train on a warm afternoon, camped in a meadow beside a clear stream. Rebecca recognized her family's distinctive blue-topped wagon immediately, and her heart leaped into her throat as she urged Daisy forward at a gallop, propriety and caution abandoned in her desperate need to reach them. "Papa!" Her voice rang across the meadow, turning heads throughout the camp. "Sarah! Catherine!" A tall figure emerged from behind the blue wagon, a man with graying hair and a weathered face that went pale with shock as he recognized the rider bearing down on him. "Rebecca?" The name came out as barely more than a whisper, as though he feared speaking it would shatter the illusion. Then louder, disbelieving, "Rebecca!" She practically fell from the saddle into her father's arms, both of them crying and talking over each other in an incoherent jumble of words. Her sisters appeared, screaming with joy, and soon Rebecca found herself engulfed in a tangle of embracing arms and tearful questions. Ethan held back, allowing them their reunion, but Rebecca saw him over her father's shoulder, still mounted on his chestnut mare, watching the scene with an expression of quiet satisfaction, mixed with something that might have been loneliness. When their eyes met, she saw him nod once, a silent communication that might have meant farewell. "Wait!" Rebecca pulled away from her family, ignoring their protests as she hurried back to where Ethan had begun to turn his horse away. "You cannot just leave, not after everything. Your family needs time with you," Ethan said gently. "I will only be in the way." "You saved her life." Rebecca's father, Thomas Walsh, had followed his daughter and now stood looking up at the man on horseback with an expression of profound emotion. My daughter, who I thought was dead and buried under those cursed rocks. You found her and brought her back to us. I did what anyone would have done, Ethan replied, but Thomas shook his head firmly. No, not anyone. Most men would have ridden on by, too concerned with their own affairs. Thomas extended his hand up to Ethan. Come down from there, son. Let us feed you properly and hear the full story. It is the least we can do. What followed was several hours of recounting, with Rebecca and Ethan taking turns explaining how they had met and the journey that brought them here. The entire wagon train seemed to gather around, listening to the tale with rapt attention and frequent exclamations of amazement. Rebecca's younger sisters, Sarah, who was 16, and Catherine, who was 15, regarded Ethan with open admiration bordering on hero worship. As the sun set, Thomas Walsh drew Ethan aside for a private conversation, while Rebecca helped prepare the evening meal. She watched them talk, noting the serious expressions on both men's faces, and wondered what her father was saying. She had seen the way Thomas had been studying Ethan throughout the evening, the assessing look of a father evaluating a potential suitor. The thought sent her heart racing because she knew what conclusion her father would reach if he was indeed thinking along those lines. Ethan Xavier was exactly the kind of man any father would want for his daughter, capable, honorable, and clearly protective of those in his care. Your father is inviting me to join you, Ethan said later that evening when he found Rebecca alone by the stream, ostensibly fetching water. Says they need someone with knowledge of the country, and that I have already proven myself trustworthy. What did you say? Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, even as hope flared bright in her chest. I told him I would think about it. Ethan crouched beside her, helping her fill the water buckets. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. All right. These past days on the trail, the time we spent together, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Did they mean anything to you? Or was it just gratitude for being rescued? Rebecca's breath caught. This was the moment, she realized, where she could be safe and dishonest, or vulnerable and truthful. She chose truth. They meant everything to me. You mean everything to me. I know it is probably too soon to feel this way, and I am probably just a naive girl who does not understand the difference between gratitude and love. But Ethan, when I think about you riding away tomorrow, my heart feels like it is being torn in two. The words came out in a rush, and she could not quite bring herself to meet his eyes as she said them. When she finally looked up, she found Ethan regarding her with an intensity that made her shiver despite the warm evening air. You are not naive, he said quietly. And you are not wrong. I felt it too, from almost the first day. This pull between us, like we were meant to find each other out there in that valley. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with exquisite gentleness. I have been running for 4 years, Rebecca, but I think I just found something worth staying for. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile country. Rebecca wound her arms around his neck, pressing close, pouring everything she felt into that single perfect moment. This was what love should be, she thought distantly. Not the pale imitation she had imagined back in Ohio, but this fierce, certain knowledge that she had found her partner, the person who would stand beside her through whatever challenges life presented. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard, foreheads resting together in the gathering darkness. I will talk to your father, Ethan murmured against her lips. Do this properly. I do not have much to offer you right now, but I am a good tracker and a hard worker. I can provide for you. I do not care about that, Rebecca said fiercely. I care about you, the man you are, not what you can give me. Your father will care, and he has the right to care. Ethan pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. Rebecca, understand what you would be choosing. I am a man without family, without property, without any real prospects beyond my skills and my 2 hands. You deserve someone established, someone who can give you security. What I deserve is someone who sees me as I actually am, not as a piece of property to be managed and protected. Rebecca met his eyes squarely. What I deserve is someone who respects my mind, my strength, even my mistakes, someone who treats me as a partner, not a burden. That is you, Ethan Xavier. You are what I deserve because you are what I choose. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds, transforming his usually serious features into something radiant. Then I suppose I had better figure out how to ask a father for his daughter's hand without sounding like a complete fool. As it turned out, Thomas Walsh had already reached his own conclusions about the matter. When Ethan formally approached him the next morning, asking for permission to court Rebecca with the intention of marriage, Thomas studied him for a long, weighing moment before responding. "My daughter nearly died because of her own stubborn independence," Thomas said slowly. "I will not make that mistake again by trying to dictate her choices. If Rebecca wants you, then I will not stand in the way. But I need to know that you understand what you are taking on. She is not some docile girl who will be content to simply follow where you lead. She has opinions, ideas, and a tendency to act on them, whether or not anyone else agrees." "I know," Ethan said simply. "That is part of why I love her." Thomas's stern expression softened into something approaching approval. "Then you have my blessing. Welcome to the family, son. Lord knows we could use someone with actual frontier skills." The wagon train continued its journey north, with Ethan now officially traveling as part of the Walsh family. The shift in his status changed the dynamics subtly but significantly. Where before he had been a helpful stranger, now he was Rebecca's intended, which brought its own expectations and complications. Rebecca's sisters treated him with a combination of romantic fascination and blatant matchmaking attempts, constantly trying to create situations where Rebecca and Ethan would be forced into close proximity. Her father began consulting with Ethan about route planning and security, clearly viewing him as another adult male whose opinion carried weight. The other families in the wagon train observed this development with great interest, and more than one mother made pointed comments about how romantic it was that Rebecca had been rescued by such a fine young man. Through it all, Ethan remained patient and good-humored, though Rebecca could see the adjustment was not entirely comfortable for someone so accustomed to solitude. She made a point of giving him space when she sensed he needed it, understanding that love did not mean constant togetherness, but rather respect for each other's nature. They stole moments alone when they could, walking together after the wagons circled for the night, talking about everything and nothing as they learned the rhythms of each other's thoughts. Ethan told her more about his childhood in Missouri, the mother he had lost too soon, and the dreams he had abandoned when he left the farm. Rebecca shared her own stories of growing up with two younger sisters, losing her mother to illness, and the strange grief that came from watching her father become a hollow version of himself in the wake of that loss. "Is that why you were so eager to leave Ohio?" Ethan asked one evening as they sat together on a fallen log, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and gold. "Because your father was not the same after your mother died?" "Partly," Rebecca admitted, "but also because everyone there saw me as poor Rebecca Walsh, the girl whose mother died, the eldest daughter who needed to find a husband quickly to help take care of the family. Nobody saw me as myself anymore. I was just this collection of other people's expectations and assumptions. And now? Now I am lost in a valley with no trail, and you were the cowboy who searched until you found me." She smiled at the description, recognizing its truth. "But the thing about being found is that I also found myself out here. I learned what I am capable of, what matters to me. Even the mistakes taught me something valuable." "What did they teach you?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. "That independence is not the same thing as isolation. That strength sometimes means accepting help instead of insisting you can do everything alone. That the freedom to choose is only meaningful if you are wise enough to choose well." "And have you chosen well?" Ethan's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. "I think so." Rebecca tilted her face up to his. "I chose to keep living when dying would have been easier. I chose to trust you when I had every reason to be afraid. And I am choosing to love you even though it would be safer to guard my heart. So yes, I think I have chosen well." Their second kiss was even better than the first, deeper and more confident as they learned the shape of each other. Rebecca felt desire kindle low in her belly, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fading sunlight and everything to do with the man whose hands were tangled in her hair. This was passion, she realized, not the pale shadow of it that she had read about in books, but the genuine, overwhelming thing that made people write poetry and compose songs. "We should get back before your father sends a search party," Ethan murmured against her mouth, though he made no move to actually release her. "I am trying to make a good impression, and disappearing into the wilderness with his daughter does not help my case." Rebecca laughed, the sound bubbling up from pure joy. "You rescued me from certain death and traveled across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory to reunite me with my family. I think your impression is fairly secure at this point. Still, there is a right way to do things." He pressed one more kiss to her forehead, and then, with visible reluctance, stood and helped her to her feet. "Your father asked me to scout ahead tomorrow, check the trail for any obstacles or dangers. Come with me?" "Is that proper?" Rebecca asked, already knowing she would agree regardless of the answer. "We will take your sister Catherine as a chaperone if it makes you feel better. But I want you there, Rebecca. I want you to learn how to read the land, understand the signs. When we are married and settled somewhere, I do not want you helpless if something happens to me." The casual mention of marriage, spoken as simple fact rather than distant possibility, sent a thrill through Rebecca. "When we are married," she repeated. "You say it so certainly." "I am certain." Ethan's blue eyes held hers with absolute conviction. "I have been wandering for 4 years, and in 2 weeks with you, I have found more purpose and meaning than in all that time combined. When someone shows you where you are meant to be, you do not question it. You just give thanks and hold on tight." The wagon train reached the Sacramento Valley 3 weeks after Ethan had joined them, having made good time thanks to his knowledge of the terrain and ability to scout the optimal routes. The valley proved to be everything the emigrants had hoped for and more: rich soil, plentiful water, and enough land that each family could stake a generous claim without encroaching on their neighbors. Thomas Walsh chose a site near a bend in the river, where the water ran clear and deep, with good southern exposure for crops and protection from harsh winds. Other families from the train settled nearby, forming the nucleus of what they hoped would become a thriving community. Everyone set immediately to the back-breaking work of clearing land, building shelters, and preparing fields for planting. Ethan proved invaluable during this period, his strength and practical knowledge making tasks easier for everyone. He helped Thomas and several other men construct a sturdy cabin for the Walsh family, showed them how to build a proper well, and taught them which local plants were edible or medicinal. Rebecca watched him work, her heart swelling with pride at how naturally he fit into this new community, how people came to respect and rely on him. For her part, Rebecca threw herself into the work of establishing their homestead. She learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve food for the coming winter, to mend tools and clothing with materials at hand. Her sisters worked alongside her, and slowly the Walsh claim began to take shape as something more than just raw wilderness. 2 months after their arrival in the valley, on a warm September evening, with the harvest moon rising full and bright, Ethan Xavier and Rebecca Walsh were married in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who made his rounds through the scattered settlements. Rebecca wore a dress sewn from fabric they had traded for with a passing merchant, simple white cotton, with lace at the collar that Catherine had painstakingly tatted by candlelight. Ethan wore his only good shirt, cleaned and pressed within an inch of its life, and the expression on his face as Rebecca walked toward him made her feel like the most beautiful woman who had ever lived. Thomas Walsh gave his daughter away with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, embracing Ethan afterward and welcoming him officially into the family. The entire community turned out for the celebration that followed, a joyous affair with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. As Rebecca danced with her new husband under the stars, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, her foolish decision to leave the wagon train, the days of suffering in the valley, Ethan's patient search that had saved her life, and the love that had grown between them against all odds. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked as they swayed together, his hands warm on her waist. "About how I had to get completely lost before I could be found," Rebecca replied. "About how the worst mistake I ever made led directly to the best thing in my life." "No regrets then?" "Not a single one." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him, uncaring of the audience around them. "I love you, Ethan Xavier. I think I have loved you since that moment in the valley when you gave me water and promised I was not dying there. I love you too." His arms tightened around her, and she felt him trembling slightly with the force of his emotion. "You were dying there, Rebecca, and then you became the reason I finally started living." They had built a small cabin on a corner of her father's claim, just far enough away to provide privacy, while still close enough for mutual support and safety. That night, Rebecca entered her new home as a married woman, nervous and excited in equal measure. Ethan lit candles throughout the single room, the flickering light casting warm shadows across the simple furnishings they had assembled. A sturdy bed frame that he had built with his own hands, a table and 2 chairs, hooks on the wall for their limited clothing, and a fireplace that would keep them warm through the coming winter. "It is not much," Ethan said, a hint of apology in his voice as he looked around their modest dwelling. "Not compared to what you might have had if you had married someone established back in Ohio." Rebecca turned to face him, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "This is everything I want. You are everything I want. Do you understand that? I would choose this cabin and you over a mansion with anyone else." What followed was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect in the way of first times when 2 people who love each other are learning how to express that love physically. Ethan was gentle and patient, constantly checking to make sure Rebecca was comfortable, while she discovered the profound intimacy of being truly known by another person. They loved each other through the night, talking and laughing and exploring this new dimension of their relationship until finally falling asleep, tangled together in the narrow bed as dawn painted the sky outside their window. The months that followed were hard work, but deeply satisfying as Ethan and Rebecca built their life together. They cleared more land, planting apple trees that would not bear fruit for years, but represented their commitment to this place, this future. Ethan supplemented their income by hiring himself out as a guide and tracker to new immigrants arriving in the valley, his reputation for reliability and skill spreading quickly throughout the region. Rebecca started a small vegetable garden and learned to make cheese and butter to trade with their neighbors. They found rhythms that worked for them, rising early to tackle chores before the heat of the day, spending evenings by the fire talking or reading aloud from the few books they owned, making love in their sturdy bed with increasing confidence and creativity. They had their disagreements, of course, 2 strong-willed people learning to compromise and communicate, but they worked through conflicts with the same determination they brought to every other challenge. Winter arrived, bringing cold rain that turned the valley into a sea of mud and tested the quality of their cabin construction. They passed the long evenings working on various projects. Ethan carved wooden toys for Rebecca's sisters, while Rebecca sewed quilts from scraps of fabric she had collected. On particularly cold nights, they would lie together under those quilts, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Rebecca said one night, her head pillowed on Ethan's chest. "At least 3 or 4. I want this house full of noise and life." "I want that too." Ethan's hand traced lazy patterns on her back. "Though I confess the idea of being responsible for small humans terrifies me somewhat. I barely managed to keep you alive out in that valley." "You did more than barely manage. You saved my life and then taught me how to survive on my own." Rebecca propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "You will be an excellent father, Ethan. You are patient and kind, and you understand that love means teaching someone to be strong rather than keeping them weak and dependent." "When did you become so wise?" "I married a very wise man. I am simply learning from his example." Spring brought renewal and hope as flowers carpeted the valley, and the apple trees they had planted showed their first tiny buds. It also brought the news that Rebecca was pregnant, a discovery that filled them both with joy and no small amount of anxiety. The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away in Sacramento, and childbirth remained a dangerous proposition even under the best circumstances. Rebecca refused to let fear overshadow her happiness, though. She continued working as much as her changing body would allow, preparing the cabin for the baby they would welcome in late autumn. The women of their small community rallied around her with advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and promises to be there when her time came. Catherine, now 16, declared herself determined to be the best aunt any baby ever had, and practiced her childcare skills on every infant in the valley. Ethan became even more protective than usual, constantly worrying that Rebecca was working too hard or not eating enough. She found his concern endearing even when it became annoying, understanding that his vigilance came from love rather than any desire to control her. They negotiated new boundaries, with Rebecca gently but firmly insisting that pregnancy had not made her fragile, while Ethan learned to trust that she would ask for help when she truly needed it. In November, on a cold, clear night with stars scattered like diamonds across the sky, Rebecca went into labor. Her sisters and several neighbor women attended her, while Ethan paced frantically outside the cabin, prevented from entering by the firm decree of the midwife who had been summoned from a nearby homestead. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day, and Ethan aged years in those hours, listening to Rebecca's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. But when the midwife finally emerged to announce that he had a son, healthy and strong despite his mother's ordeal, Ethan's relief was so profound he nearly collapsed. He rushed inside to find Rebecca exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny red-faced infant who was wailing his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. "We made a person," Rebecca said wonderingly as Ethan knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of awe. "Look at him, Ethan. He has your eyes." "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, reaching out with one calloused finger to gently touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers closed reflexively around his, gripping with surprising strength, and Ethan felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his son, his family, the future he had never let himself dream of during all those years of wandering. They named him Daniel Thomas Xavier, after Ethan's father and Rebecca's, a gesture of reconciliation with the past, even as they built their future. Daniel was a colicky baby who demanded constant attention and rarely slept for more than 2 hours at a stretch, but neither Rebecca nor Ethan would have traded him for the world. They took turns walking him through the night, learning to function on minimal sleep, and marveled at every small milestone: his first smile, the way his eyes tracked movement, the tiny noises that would eventually become words. Thomas Walsh was besotted with his first grandchild, spending hours holding the baby and telling him stories about his grandmother who had died before he was born. Rebecca's sisters competed for the title of favorite aunt, showering Daniel with attention and handmade toys. The entire community seemed invested in this child, their first baby born in the new settlement, a symbol of roots taking hold in this valley they were learning to call home. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, Rebecca and Ethan's life found new rhythms. Their homestead prospered modestly, providing enough for their needs with a little left over to save or trade. Ethan's guiding business grew as more immigrants arrived seeking someone who knew the terrain and could be trusted to get them safely to their destinations. Rebecca started teaching the valley's children basic reading and arithmetic in a corner of her father's barn, discovering an aptitude for education she had never suspected. They added a second room to their cabin when Rebecca became pregnant again, 2 years after Daniel's birth. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their daughter arrived on a warm spring morning, the delivery was mercifully quick. They named her Ellen Rose Xavier, and she proved to be a calm, content baby who slept through the night almost from the beginning, a complete contrast to her demanding older brother. "We are quite good at this," Rebecca observed one evening as she nursed Ellen while keeping one eye on Daniel, who was helping Ethan stack firewood with more enthusiasm than skill. "Making babies and raising them, I mean." "Are you suggesting we should have more?" Ethan asked, scooping Daniel up before he could topple the entire woodpile. "Maybe, eventually. We have time to decide." Rebecca smiled at the domestic scene before her, her husband covered in wood chips and their energetic son, her peacefully nursing daughter, the cabin they had built together with their own hands. "I am happy, Ethan. Genuinely, completely happy in a way I never imagined possible when I was that girl back in Ohio, dreaming of adventure and independence." "Do you miss it? The adventure part?" "Not even a little bit. I had my grand adventure when I got lost in that valley and you came searching for me. Everything since then has been about building rather than seeking. And I have discovered that building something lasting with someone you love is the greatest adventure of all." Ethan set Daniel down and came to sit beside his wife, his arm going around her shoulders in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I love you. Rebecca Xavier, thank you for letting me find you. Thank you for not giving up until you did." They sat together in comfortable silence as twilight descended over the valley, their valley now, their home in every way that mattered. Outside, the first stars were appearing, the same stars that had watched over them during that desperate journey from Silver Creek, during their wedding dance, during every moment of joy and challenge that had followed. Years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by harvests and holidays, by additions to their family when twin boys arrived unexpectedly during Rebecca's third pregnancy, by the gradual transformation of raw wilderness into cultivated land. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved listening to his father's stories about tracking and survival. Ellen developed into a gentle soul who spent hours helping her mother in the garden and teaching her younger brothers their letters. The twins, Samuel and Benjamin, were mischievous whirlwinds who kept everyone on their toes and tested their parents' patience daily. Through it all, Ethan and Rebecca remained partners in the truest sense, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating triumphs together. Their community grew as well, new families arriving each year until the scattered homesteads became a proper town with a church, a school, a general store, and all the other institutions of civilization. Ethan served as sheriff for a time, when the town needed someone with his tracking skills and unquestionable integrity. Rebecca became the official school teacher, eventually overseeing a one-room schoolhouse that educated children from throughout the valley. Thomas Walsh lived long enough to see all 4 of his grandchildren running around and to witness his daughter's complete happiness before passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. His death hit Rebecca hard, but Ethan was there to hold her through the grief, just as she had supported him years earlier when word finally reached them of his father's death. They grieved together, understanding that loss was part of life, but that having someone to share the burden made it bearable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Rebecca with a gift he had been working on in secret, a beautifully crafted rocking chair made from oak he had carefully selected and seasoned for over a year. Every joint was perfect, every curve smooth and comfortable, and carved into the headrest were their initials surrounded by a heart. "For all the evenings to come," Ethan said as he presented it to her, "when the children are grown, and it is just us again, sitting by the fire and remembering everything we have built together." Rebecca ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears streaming down her face at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It is perfect. You are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky? You almost died of thirst in a valley with no trail. I would not call that luck. But you found me. You searched until you found me, and you kept me." Rebecca stood and wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him as tightly as she had that first day when he had given her water and saved her life. "That is the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, even if I had to nearly die to make it happen." "I would search for you forever," Ethan murmured against her hair. "Through every valley, across every mountain. You are my home, Rebecca. Wherever you are is where I belong." They stood that way for a long moment, husband and wife, parents and partners, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance meeting. Outside their window, the sun set over the valley they had made their own, painting the sky in brilliant colors that promised good weather for tomorrow. Their children's voices drifted in from outside, where Daniel was supervising his younger siblings in some elaborate game involving sticks and imagination. The sounds of domestic life, of family, of a future that stretched out before them full of possibility and promise. That night, after the children were finally settled and the cabin was quiet, Rebecca and Ethan sat together in her new rocking chair, somehow managing to fit both of them in the space designed for one. They talked quietly about their plans for the coming year, about Daniel's upcoming birthday, about whether Ellen should attend the academy in Sacramento that had expressed interest in her artistic talents. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not found me that day?" Rebecca asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "If you had decided to keep following those rustlers instead?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but not with any real regret because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. You and the children, this home we have made, the community we are part of, all of it stems from that decision to follow your trail instead of the rustlers. Do you think it was fate that we were meant to find each other? I do not know about fate. I think I made a choice to search for someone in trouble, and you made a choice to keep fighting to survive, and those choices led us to each other." Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Whether it was destiny or chance or something in between does not really matter. What matters is that we are here now, together, and that I still choose you every single day. And I choose you." Rebecca tilted her face up for a proper kiss, one that held all the passion and tenderness of 10 years of marriage. "I will always choose you, Cowboy." They sat in the rocking chair long into the night, holding each other and watching the fire burn down to embers. 2 souls who had been lost and found, and who had built a life together in this wild western land. Outside, the valley that had nearly claimed Rebecca's life now sheltered her family, their home, their future. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, witness to love stories beyond counting, but none more heartfelt or hard-won than that of Rebecca Walsh Xavier and Ethan Xavier, the woman who got lost and the cowboy who searched until he found her and kept her, not as a possession, but as a partner, not as a burden, but as a blessing, forever and always in the valley they made their own. And when dawn broke the next morning, painting the California sky in shades of gold and pink, it found them still together, still holding each other, still writing their story, one peaceful day at a time. In the Wild West, they had tamed not through violence, but through love, through commitment, through the simple, profound choice to build something lasting in a land where nothing came easy, but everything worth having was worth fighting for. Their children grew, as children do, eventually leaving to build their own lives and families throughout California and beyond. Daniel became a surveyor, mapping the growing state with his father's precision and his mother's patience. Ellen married a kind shopkeeper and opened an art studio in San Francisco, where her paintings of frontier life gained considerable recognition. The twins, inseparable as always, started a freight company that transported goods throughout the Sierra Nevada region. Through all these changes, through the seasons and the years, Rebecca and Ethan remained constants in each other's lives. They grew older together, their hair graying and their steps slowing, but their love deepening with time, like the roots of the apple trees they had planted in their first year together. They sat often in the rocking chair Ethan had made, watching sunsets over their valley and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this peaceful present. The terror of Rebecca's days lost and dying, the relief of Ethan's rescue, the growing love during their journey to find her family, the joy of their wedding, the arrival of each child, the 1,000 small victories and struggles that made up a shared life. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered from across California to celebrate, Rebecca stood with Ethan's support and raised a glass to toast the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. 50 years ago, I was a foolish girl who thought she knew everything and ended up lost in a valley with no trail to guide her home, Rebecca said, her voice still strong despite her years. This man, my Ethan, searched until he found me. But more than that, he kept me, not as a prize or a possession, but as a partner, an equal, a beloved companion through every trial and triumph. He taught me that being found is not about losing yourself, but about discovering who you truly are in the presence of someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway. Ethan, now 74 years old, but still possessing the steady presence that had defined him from the beginning, kissed his wife's weathered hand and added his own words. I was a man running from his past, unable to stay anywhere or build anything lasting. Then I found Rebecca, or maybe she found me, and suddenly I had a reason to stop running. She taught me that home is not a place, but a person, and that love is not about keeping someone, but about freeing them to become everything they were meant to be. I searched for her in that valley, but the truth is she was searching for me too, across time and distance and fate. And here we are, 50 years later, still finding new reasons to be grateful we found each other. The gathering erupted in applause and tears, and the celebration continued late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. But eventually, when the last guest had departed and the cabin was quiet again, Rebecca and Ethan returned to their rocking chair, fitting together as naturally as they had for 5 decades. Do you have any regrets? Rebecca asked the question she had asked so many times over the years, always curious to hear Ethan's answer, which sometimes changed with perspective. None, Ethan replied, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. Not a single moment would I change, because it all led us here, to this life, this love, this family we created from nothing but determination and devotion. I love you, Rebecca whispered. I have loved you since that moment in the valley, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Ethan answered. You are still the girl I searched for, the woman I found, the partner I kept choosing every day for 50 years. You are my heart, Rebecca Xavier. You always will be. They rocked together in the chair Ethan had built so many years ago. 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built a love story that would echo through generations. Their grandchildren would tell their children about the ancestor who got lost in the valley and the cowboy who saved her, how their great-great-grandparents had loved each other with a fierce devotion that shaped not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after. Outside, the valley stretched away into darkness, no longer wild and threatening, but cultivated and peaceful, transformed by the labor of people who had chosen to make this place their home. The same stars that had watched over Rebecca during her desperate ordeal now shone down on her peaceful old age, completing a circle that had begun with near death and ended with a life fully lived in love and purpose. And when, years later, they were finally laid to rest side by side in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, their headstone bore a simple inscription that told their entire story. She was lost. He searched. Together they were found. The end.